Bring in Fox News contributor, constitutional law attorney Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, when Comey initially posted that Instagram photo, his caption insinuated that he did not create this shell art formation in the sand. I'm curious if it matters whether, he got a lot of criticism at the time. Everyone was saying, oh, we all know that you actually put that together and then photographed it. Does any of that matter in a legal sense in this case, whether Comey is the originator of that message or whether he just walked by, as he claims to have done, and photographed it?
Well, I have to say, I must be in a parallel universe to be talking about the shell artwork of James Comey. The fact is that it is relevant only to the extent that he might have denied a fact that proved his denial proved to be false to federal officials.
Sorry to stop you, but you mean like if there was a witness or something on the beach who saw him? Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
Well, if he was questioned and gave false information to federal investigators, that can be the basis of a charge. I think that just showing the picture is going to be a weak case in terms of a threat. What's interesting is that the first indictment that was dismissed involved false statements under 18 U.S.C. 1001. And that's the most used provision in terms of false statement prosecutions by the Department of Justice. What's interesting about that dismissal is that it was based on the fact that Lindsay Halligan, who was the acting U.S. attorney, was viewed as not properly in her position. That problem has now been cured by James Hundley, who is appointed essentially by the court. Now, it's not clear if they went back and just cured that problem, they're going to reissue part of what they were pursuing under the original indictment, or whether we're talking at this point of something that is a new charge.
So, Professor, we don't yet know what the contents of the indictment hold, but Kerry Urban posits that it may be charges under 18 U.S.C. 871, which makes it a federal crime to knowingly and willfully mail or make any threat to kill, kidnap, or inflict bodily harm upon the president, vice president, or their successors. There may also be a charge under a transmission clause of 18 U.S.C. subsection 871. Is showing a picture of shells that say 8647, is that, I mean, that could be taken as a threat, but does it amount to one to you?
In my view, it would very likely be viewed as protected speech if it was the basis of a criminal indictment. That alone would have a hard time standing up in court. I've seen that reporting, and we'll have to see how they would stick that landing in an indictment. But just showing a picture like that it would be a very difficult foundation, a very unstable foundation for a prosecution, because right out of the gate will come a First Amendment challenge that the court, I think, would consider first and foremost.
All right, Jonathan, stand by. Thanks for jumping.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.